A few years ago, two members of our UU congregation in Roswell, Georgia, just north of Atlanta, asked me to speak on the topic of beauty, truth, and goodness, individual and collective. How would I do that, I wondered. Then my mind went to the experience I just related to you, and I began to unpack its nuggets of truth. Sages have devoted lifetimes to developing entire philosophies on the subject. I have 15 minutes. Less now. I will skim the surface, dipping not too far, I hope, into the philosophy weeds. But again, this story, the one I just related, reveals a lot about the subject for me. Who could not see beauty from the top of that mountain or in the image of those three happy little boys? But beauty is in the eye of the beholder, as they say. It is subjective. It is the view of the individual, or the I sphere, as Ken Wilber, the integral philosopher, tells us. Sri Aurobindo, the early 20th century Indian philosopher and yogi, calls it the way of the heart. The father of process philosophy, which Marco has mentioned from this lectern, Alfred North Whitehead, considered beauty the motive compelling force in the universe, its defining characteristic. There are some forms that seem to be universally regarded as beautiful: classical architecture, a sweeping vista, the patterns of a snowflake, a human shape, a face. But in the end, this form of truth must be individual and subjective. What about goodness? A stranger's gesture of extreme kindness and thoughtfulness, Martha Peters, requiring time and effort, represents for me goodness. Goodness or morality is the truth of the we sphere for Wilber. It is the collection of values that represent agreements we make among ourselves as to how we will get along, he says. It is Aurobindo's way of the will or action. Postmodernism would tell us that ideas about goodness, then, are cultural constructs, not absolutes, not carved in stone like the early collection of such values that Moses brought back down from the mountain. They would be, then, collective notions of truth. Henry Nelson Wyman, an early process philosopher and theologian and Unitarian, believed that goodness is the primary force in the universe, that we create it through the process of creative interchange, his term, with our fellows on the planet, that we are compelled to do so, and that the world moves slowly but inexorably toward goodness, despite the evil and brutality that confronts us daily in the world. Goodness happens, he says, when we absorb the view of another, a view different from our own, into our own worldview, altering our view, enlarging it, broadening it. But Wyman does not delineate forms of goodness. He lays out the process by which it happens. It is not subjective, but intersubjective, emerging as it does from cultural and human interchange. Goodness changes, it grows. And what of truth? Some would see Martha Peters' act of kindness as evidence of objective truth, truth with a capital T. Not modernists, heirs of the Enlightenment, for whom the measurable external world of material stuff can be the subject of truth, but others, for whom the interior world is equally real and valid. I would be among those who would assert that there is operating in the universe a power or force that compels us to goodness, a powerful, creative force for life. What the philosopher Bergson called the élan vital, the life force. I, along with Emerson and the process philosophers Whitehead and Hartshorne and Wyman and Rebecca Parker and the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. Objective truth is the province or view of the it sphere, says Wilber. It is what is. It is Aurobindo's way of the intellect. In his essay, The Oversoul, Ralph Waldo Emerson says that truth is individual, in that it is something we intuit. We don't learn it, we know it in our guts. We need only open ourselves to it. When we do, it comes to us. We know what is right and true. Most of the great spiritual traditions grew from the inspirations of and revelations to a single sage, the truths of individuals, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad. But even the great sages were of a time and place. Their ideas of truth emerged from a given perspective or worldview, making them in part the products of culture. The philosopher Georg Hegel in the early 19th century was the first to advance the idea that truth changes and grows, that it develops as culture and human consciousness develop hand in hand. Hegel believed that truth is a product of worldview, that it is valid as such, but that in the stream of the unfolding or development of absolute truth, it is only an incomplete stage. He and Bergson at the end of the 19th century, along with the process philosophers of the 20th century, believed in the idea of the universe as unfolding, as a creative becoming, moving in a direction drawn toward the three core values of beauty, truth, and goodness, the eternal forms, says Whitehead, that draw us by divine persuasion in what he called the direction of perfection. Integral philosophy, led by Ken Wilber, has grown out of the work of these people, Hegel, Bergson, the process philosophers, and others, to further this idea of the development both of cultural worldviews and individual consciousness. Culture, they say, has developed in stages, from the earliest archaic stage through the magical stage in which natural spirits are the motive forces in the world, through the traditional mythic stage out of which the great spiritual traditions grew in pre-modernity, and which is still alive today among fundamentalists all over the globe, through modernity, the stage of rationality, whose development we call the Enlightenment, through post-modernity, the stage of relativity that holds that truth is only a cultural construct and that all truths are equal, to the integral stage, which holds not that all truths are equal, but rather all truths are partial, that as consciousness grows broader and deeper to include more of what is in the universe, new truths develop, which transcend existing truths, but also include them. Big tent. Again, this is an articulation of a process whereby truth grows. Nothing is thrown out with the bath, the way that the validity of the unseen interior world, the world of the spirit, was thrown out by scientific materialism with the ascendancy of modernity. Sounding like Emerson, Wilber says that within each of us lies the capacity and potential to develop or expand to an awareness of the universal spirit of which we are a part. And again, sounding like Emerson, he says that intuitions of that universal spirit are available to all of us at any level of development, sometimes as a peak experience, the kind we might experience at the birth of a child or on the top of a mountain. And here is where the rubber meets the road for us UUs, who honor the principle of the free and disciplined search for truth, for whom no truth is carved in stone, and who are often skeptical of the whole idea of truth. In his book, Integral Consciousness and the Future of Evolution, the integral thinker Steve McIntosh suggests that the way to make beauty, truth, and goodness real in our lives, the way to broaden and develop our own consciousness, the way to improve the human condition at the same time, and the way to assist in the evolution of culture from one worldview to a more expansive and inclusive one. That way is to practice these values, to live them. In so doing, we metabolize them, he says, taking them in and giving them out, breathing them in and breathing them out, as it were, creating a circuit of beauty, truth, and goodness. We take in truth through learning and give it back through teaching. We take in beauty by appreciating it, fleeting glimpses of relative actual perfection, McIntosh calls them, and we give it back through creative expression of many kinds. The spiritual practice of goodness includes the ways we teach truth and express beauty, McIntosh says, but it also includes stillness, receiving goodness through contemplation, meditation, prayer, worship, all forms of stillness, he says. This is what Emerson meant by making oneself open to truth. With a new understanding of the significance of our everyday actions, we can come to sense that our ordinary activities can become a kind of spiritual practice through which we reach for an expanded consciousness and awareness, and pulling in the wisdom we find there, use it to promote the common good and improve the human condition. For McIntosh, the manifestations of beauty, truth, and goodness that we encounter or create in our daily lives are the most direct ways that we can experience the universal spirit. These are the comprehensible elements of deity, he says, the comprehensible elements of deity. In other words, this is where we see God. And he adds that it is in the pursuit of these values that we find the pinnacle of human life. Returning our camera, Martha Peters practiced goodness. She expanded her consciousness just a bit, perhaps, widening it to include a broader understanding of we, just a bit closer to the notion of universal compassion. And in the process, she shared that expanded consciousness with the Hudsons, breathing out goodness and truth so that we could breathe it in, pulling us into wider, broader, deeper consciousness, improving the human condition in the process. Perhaps. The process philosopher Charles Hartshorne, also a Unitarian, would say that this is an example of, quote, our existence from moment to moment enriching the divine life. I love that thought. Our existence from moment to moment enriching the divine life. Wyman would say that this is creating goodness, lured or persuaded by the goodness that he calls God. Whether or not we believe in any concept of spirit, there is great power in the practice of these primary values of beauty, truth, and goodness, Whitehead's eternal forms. For it is in so doing that our principle becomes more than a nice, fuzzy idea. Beauty, truth, and goodness may not be absolutes, carved on stone tablets. They may be social constructs. They may be unique to the individual. They may change with time, evolve. But regardless, the practice of these values makes the world a better place, enriches us as practitioners, expanding our consciousness, drawing it to a higher level and contributing, if only infinitesimally, to the evolution of our culture. This is what it means to dedicate oneself and one's movement to a free and disciplined search for truth. It is exactly what the founders of the Unitarian Society of Geneva, Illinois meant when they wrote their covenant in 1842, a covenant that congregation recites in worship to this day. They recited it this morning, I'm sure. We did when Kate and I were members 40 years ago. They will say, being desirous of promoting practical goodness in the world and of aiding each other in our moral and religious improvement, we have associated ourselves together, not as agreeing in opinion, not as having attained universal truth in belief or perfection in character, but as seekers after truth and goodness. I love that too. May we faithfully conduct such a free and disciplined search, and may that search change our lives and the world. May it be so.